There's a moment in life when you realize something very simple, but very powerful. The people who underestimate you usually have no idea what they're about to lose. The morning it happened, I walked into my boss Richard's office carrying a thin folder. My expression was calm, neutral. 11 years at that company had taught me how to keep my face steady. I placed the folder on his desk. He looked up. "What's this?" "Just something you should read," I said. He opened it casually, the way someone does when they expect nothing important. But as he read the first page, the color slowly drained from his face. His eyes moved to the second page, then the third. His jaw tightened, and for the first time in 11 years, I saw something in Richard's eyes I had never seen before. It wasn't anger. It was fear. I picked up my bag, buttoned my blazer, and walked out of his office without another word. But here's the part he didn't understand yet. By the end of that week, the agency I had spent over a decade helping build would realize something painful. They hadn't just lost an employee. They had lost the engine that kept the whole thing running. But to understand how that moment happened, you have to go back 11 years earlier. I was 26 when I joined Hartwell and Associates, fresh out of graduate school, drowning in student loans, and carrying enough ambition to light up an entire city. The agency had a good reputation, solid clients, a confident managing partner named Richard who loved giving speeches about merit, loyalty, and rewarding hard work. And back then, I believed every single word. What I didn't know was this: sometimes the hardest lesson in a career isn't learning how to succeed. It's learning when success is being quietly taken from you. And when that realization finally hits, everything changes. At first, the work nobody wanted became the work that built my career. While most people at the agency fought over glamorous consumer brands, cosmetics, lifestyle products, flashy campaigns, I ended up in the pharmaceutical division. It wasn't exciting. It was complicated, technical, strictly regulated. One careless sentence in a press release could trigger an FDA compliance review. One wrong headline could damage a company worth billions. Most people avoided it, but I leaned into it. I spent nights reading industry journals, learning regulatory language, studying how medical journalists thought, how biotech companies communicated during crises, and how reputations in healthcare could collapse overnight. Slowly, something started happening. When a pharmaceutical client had a problem, people came to me. When a product launch needed careful messaging, they called me. When reporters started asking difficult questions, I was the one in the room. Even Richard noticed. He'd stop by my desk sometimes and say things like, "Diana, you've got a real gift for this industry." And I believed him. By the time I was 31, I landed my first major account, a biotech company preparing for a major drug approval. I spent 4 straight weekends building the pitch, refining slides, practicing answers, studying every possible question they could ask. 6 days after the meeting, they signed the contract. That account grew. Then another client came. And then another. By the time I turned 35, the portfolio I managed represented nearly 1/3 of the agency's pharmaceutical revenue. I had built a team. I had built relationships. I had built results. But here's the strange part. 3 times during those years, I was passed over for promotion. The first time, Richard told me the timing wasn't right. The second time, the job went to someone with less experience and fewer results. And the third time? That's when I finally understood something that would change everything. Because that third decision didn't just disappoint me. It revealed the truth about how the whole system actually worked. And once you see the truth, you can't pretend you didn't. The third time I was passed over was the moment everything finally became clear. 2 months earlier, Richard had called me into his office and spent 45 minutes explaining the vice president position opening in our healthcare division. He asked how I would build the team, how I would grow the accounts, what my strategy would be. I answered every question carefully, confidently. Before I left, he smiled and said something I still remember word for word. "Diana, you're exactly what this division needs." So when I walked out of that office, I believed him. I even turned down a recruiter from a competing agency the following week. But 2 months later, Richard called me back in. This time someone else was sitting in the chair beside him. Her name was Kristen. She had joined the agency just 19 months earlier. Smart, polished, very good at one particular skill, making Richard feel like the smartest man in every room. She laughed at his jokes in meetings, quoted his ideas during presentations, sent him articles with handwritten notes about how insightful his thinking was. And that afternoon, Richard smiled at me and said something that sounded carefully rehearsed. "I've decided to promote Kristen to the VP role. She brings a freshness to the team, a new energy." Kristen gave me a small practiced smile. And in that moment, something inside me didn't break. It sharpened. Because for the first time in 11 years, I understood the real rule of the game. This company wasn't built on merit. It was built on comfort, on proximity, on who made the boss feel safe. And suddenly everything made sense. I walked out of Richard's office that day without anger, without bitterness, just clarity. That night I sat at my kitchen table with a single sheet of paper. On the left side, I wrote down everything I had built. My clients, my reputation, my team, my knowledge of the industry. And on the right side, I wrote down something far more dangerous. A plan. Because if they believed I was replaceable, they were about to learn how wrong they were. For 6 months, I said nothing. At the office, everything looked the same. I attended meetings, led client calls, delivered reports, smiled when necessary. But quietly, behind the scenes, everything was changing. The first call I made was to an attorney who specialized in business and employment law. I asked 3 simple questions. What could I legally take with me? What conversations could I have with clients? And what mistakes should I avoid? Then I started having very quiet conversations. Not with everyone, just the people who mattered. The first was my longest-standing client, a pharmaceutical CEO whose company I had supported for 8 years. We met for dinner. Halfway through the meal, I told him the truth. "I'm leaving the agency," I said, "and I'm starting my own firm." He didn't interrupt. He just listened. Then he asked 2 questions. "What's your timeline? And how big will your team be?" I answered both. He sat quietly for a moment, then leaned back and said something I will never forget. "Diana, the agency was just the vehicle. You were the engine." He signed a letter of intent before dinner even ended. Over the next few weeks, 2 other clients made the same decision. Then everything moved quickly. I incorporated the business, leased a small office, hired my first operations manager. And on a Tuesday morning in March, I walked into Richard's office carrying a thin folder. You already know that moment. The resignation letter, 3 client termination notices, the silence, the look on his face. But here's the real ending to the story. 1 year later, my company had 9 clients and 14 employees. An investment group approached US with a partnership offer that valued the firm higher than I had imagined possible. Meanwhile, I heard Hartwell and Associates had a difficult year. Losing 3 major accounts at once will do that. I didn't celebrate. I didn't feel revenge. What I felt was something much quieter. Ownership. Because the most important thing I learned through all of this is simple. Your talent, your reputation, your relationships. Those things never belong to the company. They always belong to you. And the moment you realize that, that's when everything truly begins.